So here we go next uh, to our essay. In our previous lecture, we have read the introductory part of the essay, in which Chesterton states that the real account of old age, the real benefits of old age, are not known to young people. The way in which they are being generally told to the young people, they make the young people very skeptical about the real benefits of old age, or the things are in contradiction if they are being stated really to the old people. He says that, for instance, one pleasure attached to growing older is that many things seem to be growing younger, growing fresher and more lively than we once supposed them to be. He said, for instance, he said that if I state the advantages of young age, then they might appear contradictory in a comic way, in a very funny way. They seems to be contradictory. And what is that? That example he gives, that for instance, for example, one pleasure which is attached to growing old is that many things seems to be growing younger. When you grow old, things grow young for you, things grow new for you, growing fresher and more lively than we once supposed them to be. He says there are many things which at the time of young age they didn't appear that much lively, that much fresh, that much young to us, but in the old age those things grow fresh, they grow more and more live, they grow more and more young to the old people. And that is the contradictory thing, that the person, he himself is growing old, he himself is maturing, but the things, they are appearing fresh for him, they are coming in a new flavor to him, in a new flavor to him, in a new energy, new vigorness to him. And that is the contradictory thing, that he is growing old and the things are growing young for him. We begin to see significance, or in other word, to see life in a large number of traditions, institutions, maxims and codes of manner that seem in our first days to be dead. Now this is what he is trying to exemplify, his giving the example that the many things we he said we start to see significance, we start to see some importance, some life in a large number of traditions, because this is what generally happens, that the traditions which are there since ages, though they are since ages, but at the young age they seems to be dead. In our first days, means in our young age, they seem to be dead, they seems to be lifeless, they seems to be useless. What are those things? Those traditions, some institutions, some maxims, some proverbs, some codes of manner, some behaviors, some civilization manners, they seems to be dead, or they seems to be useless, they seems to be lifeless, they seems to be bygone things in our first days, in our young age. But now in our old age, when we grow old, then we start to realize the importance, the value, the usability of those maxims, those proverbs, those lifestyles, those behavior codes, and then they appear to be more fresh and more live to us. A young man grows up in a world that often seems to him intolerably old. Now look at the things, that how he's explaining his idea, how he's putting forward his theory, that a young man grows up in a world. When we are grow, then what we feel, what we realize, that we are living in a world which is intolerably old. All the codes, all the manners, all the behaviors, all the proverbs, all the maxims, all the traditions, they all seem age old to us. And we feel like burdened with those old age traditions, manners and proverbs, or all those cultures. So he says that for the young man, the world seems to be as an old world in which they are living. They are always burdened with those old traditions and those mannerisms and all those things. But to the old person, they seems very young. He grows up among proverbs and precepts that appear to be quite stiff and senseless. Yes, it is quite true that in a young person, he is unable to understand those percepts, those sayings, those proverbs, which are which appear quite stiff, quite hard, and quite senseless to the old person. That they seems useless to the old person. He feels that they are of no use to me. He seems to be stuffed with stale things, to be given the stones of death instead of the bread of life. He said that the old man is seemed to stuff with those stale things. बासी चीज़ों से वो भरा रहता है, बर्डन रहता है हमेशा उसको. जो ओल्ड प्रोवर्ब्स बताई जाती हैं, ओल्ड मैनरिज्म्स बताई जाती हैं, ओल्ड सेइंग्स बताई जाती हैं. He seems to be given the stones of death instead of bread of लाइफ. और ओल्ड जो ट्रेडिशंस होती हैं, ओल्ड जो प्रोवर्ब्स होती हैं, वो बार बार जिस ढंग से यंग मैन को बताई जाती हैं, यंग मैन को सिखाई जाती हैं, उससे उसे क्या फील होता है? दैट ही इज़ बीइंग गिवन द स्टोन्स ऑफ डेथ. उसे जैसे मारने के लिए उसे पत्थर मारे जा रहे हैं, इंस्टेड ऑफ गिविंग हिम द ब्रेड ऑफ लाइफ. टू बी फेड ऑन द डस्ट ऑफ द डेड पास्ट, टू लिव इन ए टाउन ऑफ टॉम्स. उसे क्या लगता रहता है? दैट ही इज़ लिविंग इन ए प्लेस ऑफ पास्ट, ही इज़ लिविंग अमंग द डेड टॉम्स. जैसे कि वो मुर्दा जो कब्र हैं उनके बीच में कहीं रह रहा है. बार बार उसे जो है वो जो मृत पास्ट जो है, डेड पास्ट जो है, उसकी धूल जो है वो उसको बार बार ईट करनी पड़ रही है, उसको बार बार उससे फेस करना पड़ रहा है. इट इज़ अ वेरी नेचुरल मिस्टेक, बट इट इज़ ए मिस्टेक. It's a very natural mistake to do these things with the young people or to feel like this. But yes, it is a mistake. लेकिन है तो mistake ही. The advantage of advancing year lies in discovering that traditions are true and therefore lies. He said the first and foremost advantage of being old, being mature, being grow is what? That you realize that these traditions, these proverbs, these maxims, these sayings, these codes of conduct, they are not useless. They are true and therefore they are alive. They are not lifeless. They are not useless. They are useful. They are quite alive. They are very fresh. Indeed, a tradition is not even traditional except when it is alive. No, what he is trying to say, how is he is proving it, that in reality what happens that a tradition cannot be tradition unless it is useful, unless it is has proved its usefulness since ages. And what he says, it is great fun to find out that the world has not repeated proverbs because they are proverbial. Now he is putting it in a very scientific manner, in a very mathematical calculation. He is saying that the proverbs are not being prevalent just because they are proverbials. जो हमारी proverbs हैं, जो हमारी कहावतें हैं, जो हमारी उक्तियाँ हैं, लोकोक्तियाँ जो हैं, they are not prevalent. वो इसलिए प्रचलित नहीं है क्योंकि वो इस तरह की साउंड करती हैं, क्योंकि वो कहावत जैसी लगती हैं. But why? But because they are practical. Why they are prevalent since so many ages, since such a long period of time? Not because of their catchy words. वो सुंदर लगती हैं, उनको बोलने में अच्छा लगता है, इसलिए नहीं. But they are practical. लेकिन वो useful हैं. They have proved themselves to be righteous, and that's why they are prevalent for such a long period. Until I owned a dog, I never knew what is meant by the proverb about letting a sleeping dog lie or the fable about the dog in manger. He says that now he is talking about the advantages of old age, about the advantages of being experiencing a thing in reality instead of just reading it or just hearing it. He says until I own a dog myself, जब तक मैं खुद एक कुत्ता नहीं पालता हूँ, जब तक खुद मैं एक डॉग के साथ रियल एक्सपीरियंस शेयर नहीं करता हूँ, until then I will not learn the real meaning of a dog in the manger or about letting a sleeping dog lie. ये जो हमारी कहावत है, that let a sleeping dog lie, एक कुत्ता अगर सो रहा है तो उसे सोते रहने देना चाहिए, मीन्स उसके साथ छेड़खानी नहीं करनी चाहिए, अदरवाइज इट विल बाइट यू. ये जो कहावत है, या ए डॉग इन मैंगर, मतलब अपनी जो मैंगर होती है, अपना जो निवास स्थान होता है, वहाँ वो कैसा फील करता है, वहाँ वो अपना स्वामित्व कैसे शो करता है, दोज टू प्रोवर्ब्स विच आई हैव हर्ड मैनी टाइम्स, बट द रियल मीनिंग ऑफ देम इज understood by me only when I start having a dog. Now, those dead phrases are quite alive to me, for they are parts of a perfectly practical psychology. He says, those dead phrases to me until I have a dog. जब तक मेरे पास एक डॉग नहीं था, those phrases are like dead phrases to me. वो मेरे लिए कोई यूजफुल नहीं थे, बट once I have started to have those things in reality, and when I started having practicing those things in real life, then they appeared quite perfectly practical to me. Until I went to live in the country, I had no notion of the meaning of the maxim, it is an ill wind that blows nobody good. He says, until I went to live in the countryside, in the village area, then I had no notion of the maxim, of the proverb, of the saying that that wind is ill wind which does nobody good. वो कह रहा है, जब तक मैं कंट्री साइड नहीं गया था, जब तक मैं एग्रीकल्चर एरियाज़ में मैंने विजिट नहीं किया था, तब तक मुझे इस प्रोवर्ब का जो मीनिंग था, जो रियल मीनिंग था, वो मुझे नहीं पता था कि वो हवा जिससे किसी का भला नहीं हो रहा हो, मतलब जो विंड जो ब्लो हो रही है ना, जिससे ना तो बारिश आ रही हो, जिससे ना फसल को फ़ायदा हो रहा हो, जिससे ना पशुओं को फ़ायदा हो रहा हो, जिससे ना ह्यूमन बींग्स को फ़ायदा हो रहा हो, दैट विंड इज़ इल विंड, वो एक बुरी हवा होती है. ये जो मैगजिम थी, इसका पता मुझे कब लगा? व्हेन आई वेंट टू लिव इन ए कंट्री साइड. Now it seems to me as pertinent and even pungent as if it were a new remark just made to me by neighbor at the garden gate. और वो कह रहा है, now it seems to be very real, very trustworthy, very realistic, very relevant to me, as if some remark made to me by a neighbor of mine at a गार्डन गेट. ऐसे अभी मुझे ऐसे लग रही है जैसे किसी ने मुझे हकीकत में एक वेरी अच्छी सी सलाह मेरे गार्डन गेट पे मुझे मेरे किसी पड़ोसी ने दी हो. इट इज़ समथिंग टू कम टू लिव इन ए वर्ल्ड ऑफ लिविंग एंड सिग्निफिकेंट थिंग्स instead of dead and unmeaning things. And this is what he says is the pleasure of being old, that you live in a in a significant world instead of a dead and meaningless world. In young age, what happens that we don't have the real idea of these maxims, these traditions, these proverbs, but in the old age we realize the real meaning of them, we understand the real meaning of them, we have now realized the significance of those things, and now those things, those proverbs, those traditions, those cultural values are quite alive and fresh to us. And he says this is much better than living in a dead world, in a useless, in an unmeaning world, than to live in those significant world. And it is youth in revolt, even in righteous revolt, which sees its surroundings as dead and unmeaning. And he says, in our youth, in our young age, because we see things in a very, we can say, unmeaning or dead manner, though we see them in a revoltful manner. उनका एक विरोध करने के लिए, हम उनके प्रति अपना विरोध जताने के लिए उनको जो है डेड और अनमीनिंग यूज करते हैं. इवन इफ इट मे बी राइटियस रिवोल्ट, हो सकता है ये एक सही रिवोल्ट हो, क्योंकि जब तक हम थिंग्स को टेस्ट नहीं कर लेते, वी डिडंट रियलाइज द ट्रू वैल्यू ऑफ देम. बट स्टिल द ओल्ड एज इज what gives us the real taste of these things. It is old age and even second childhood that has come to see that everything means something and that life itself has never died. Okay, this is the real pleasure, that only in the old age we realize the true meaning of things. We realize that these traditions, these things which are surrounded by us, they are not dead, they are all full of life, they are all full of vigor, they all are full of meaning. So this is the real benefit of old age, that the things which appear to be dead, which appear to be lifeless, which appear to be meaningless in the young age, they all comes to life, they all become full of vigor, they all become full of energy, they all become full of meaning in the old age. And then when we grow old, then we see things as young, We see the world as young. We see the world as full of energy, full of vigor. So that's it for the day. Thank you.